The podcast represent for the youths them. Have a right so we share for reviews them. Have a mind and a voice so we use them. Tell me why them a try confuse them. And we a spread unity, spread love in your community. And that's just who we be. Yet still we face scrutiny. Make a choice, use your voice, share your thoughts and human rights. Make a choice, use your voice, share your thoughts and human rights.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Just Tea podcast brought to you by Jamaicans for Justice. Here we talk about topical issues in a way for you to understand. My name is Tamoy and I'm joined by
Dashawn Carto
and
Xavier McFarlane.
Today we're deep diving into the whole conversation about actions having consequences. Now, when people do something wrong, automatically you think then there has to be a penalty or a consequence. But we know when you do the right thing, then a positive consequence comes about.
Yes.
Right. But in this context, we're going to talk about aspects of the negative consequences.
Yes.
And so we want to deep dive into criminal responsibility. What do you think people or young people need to understand when they first come in contact with the law? Xavier, any preliminary thoughts?
Okay, one thing you should understand. You have rights. That's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
And two, your rights aren't absolute.
Mm-hmm.
So
What that mean?
that means that it is limited. So if it is that you do a particular wrong, that is a reasonable and justifiable reason to actually limit your right. So you can be arrested. So that means your right to liberty can be reasonably taken away.
Dashawn?
And you mentioned age of responsibility, and I think we have to consider what does that even mean. So a lot of people think of it as this mystical term,
Right.
but it's essentially stating that once you've reached the age of 12, you can be held liable or responsible for criminal acts. So you're not going to look up a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old if he
Right.
does something that is technically an offense. But once you're beyond the age of 12, you have to start think about your actions actually having legal repercussions.
Yes.
So you're going to do something, you're going to thief somebody, you're going to thief something from somebody after the age of 12, you can be locked up, you can be arrested, and you can be charged.
But what are your thoughts though on the age of criminal responsibility? Do you think 12 is okay? You think we need to increase it? Because I know that JFJ often believes, or let me rephrase, JFJ does believe that the age of criminal responsibility ought to be increased in accordance with international standards. But what does Xavier think? What does Dashawn think?
Xavier Xavier agrees with JFJ. When you look on a 12-year-old, I feel like being 12 is the transitional period.
Okay.
Yes.
From being a child to almost an adolescent. And that's a tender age too, where there's a lot of development happening. There's a lot of need to explore and to understand better what's right from what's wrong.
Right.
Now, when you move it to an age like 14,
Yes.
I believe that there's a level of maturity that comes with that age, because now you are 2 years shy of that particular transitional age. So all of the exploring and that transitional period
Right.
that you would have been in would have already passed, and you've appreciated and learned what life is as an adolescent and as a teenager growing up to being an adult who will
Right.
be having responsibilities as a citizen. So I feel like 14 on the international standard makes sense.
So another thing that I'd like to add is that when we are having this conversation around raising the age of criminal responsibility, a lot of persons think that it's just an excuse to ensure that children are getting away from accountability. We're just slapping them on the wrist and we're just ensuring that pitney are going to just stay pitney and they're not going to understand that their actions have consequences. But rather what we're arguing is that there are other avenues for which we can hold children accountable. Other avenues that are actually more beneficial for children and the whole of society and our communities. So we've actually had lengthy and comprehensive discussions around the positive impacts of child diversion,
Right.
the benefits that it can have with regards to mending the bond between the victims and the child and ensuring that our children children aren't being forced or being placed into the formal justice system, which, as we know, can have some really negative repercussions on their development and their safety.
But I would wager that there are some people who think that, well, 12 years old is just fine. 12 years old, you're still perhaps at an age where you do know what you're doing is incorrect and that it shouldn't be increased. And so I want to hear from you at home.
Yes.
Tell us in the comments, do you think the age of criminal responsibility ought to be increased? If so, how much? And if not, why do you think it needs to remain where it is? While you ponder about that, we want to segue into persons being arrested, young people. What are some fundamental rights or things that they need to know that if you are being detained by the police, well, all hope isn't gone in respect of their rights?
Right. So you need to know that when you're being arrested, or if it is that you're going to be arrested, that police officer is empowered by the Constabulary Force Act to arrest you. Now, section 15 of that act says that if they have reasonable suspicion, they should arrest you. And if you look to the Constitution, section 14(1)(fi) says that you should not be subject to any sort of arbitrary arrest unless there is reasonable suspicion for that arrest. And if you're arrested and then bring you in and I ask you questions, you have that right to be silent. You don't have to answer at all. And that's provided in section 16(6)(f) of the Constitution.
I would then add on to that because you're giving up for career. You're
You
giving
must
up for
cite
the
the
bills, getting a career on top of it.
Yes.
You also have a right to an attorney.
Yes.
Oftentimes people think that, listen, just like when a scene show up, you can get your lawyer for come. And that you can have your attorney that you might call on the phone, or you can go through legal aid. So if you need legal representation, once you're arrested, that is afforded to you. Any thoughts, Sean?
And you also have the right to know why you're being arrested.
Yes.
And when we say know why you're being arrested, it also has to be communicated to you in a way that you can understand. So no high language will come and cite some major legal source or anything. But as young people, we want to understand really why are we being arrested, why are we facing this consequence for our action. And also young people. We know so bad, we know so big, we know so have tough chats. But when you're in conflict or when you're being faced by law enforcement, it's oftentimes in your best interest to be respectful and to approach the situation with caution. And as Xavier said, you have the right to remain silent, and oftentimes that's the best thing that you can do so that you don't incriminate yourselves.
So now we hear that we have right to silence. We hear that the police never just take you and lock you in a van back and that's it, and you don't know what you've been arrested for. But let's say we've reached now the point now where you've been arrested, let's assume it was lawful, and you are now being charged with a particular offense, the sentencing aspect of it now. A lot of people, and we see it in the media cycle, where persons are guilty of different offenses and somebody say, you should not get more time, you should not get locked up for life. People perhaps not really appreciating how the sentencing works. So let's talk a little bit about the proportionality when it comes down to sentencing. Your just thoughts around that. It's very general. What do you think?
Well, that's a very interesting, thing.
That's what I'm asking.
When you look at sentencing, that's the duty of the judge.
Right.
And then the judge don't just get up and say, yeah man, you kill a whole heap of people, so I'm gonna give you 150 years. No. The judge is actually guided by sentencing guidelines that tells the particular offense and the rudimentary sort of sentence that goes with it.
Right.
And those are actually like the starting points. After that, there is they look on the things that they call mitigating factors and aggregating factors, and they use those to determine what the final sentence is. So sometimes it can be higher and sometimes it will be lower.
And I think I really like that you mentioned the guidelines because it also allows for consistency. So if let's say you're supposed to go to court in one parish as opposed to another, you can understand or expect to some extent that you would face the same level of sentencing or the same degree of punishment for the similar actions. And so that's a really important thing. I think also with this discussion of proportionality, understand that it goes both ways. And so the crime should not exceed the punishment or the action that you've done, but also that when you commit a wrongful act, the crime should, the sentencing rather, should be commensurate. So you shouldn't be getting off scotch-free. So it needs to be proportionate with the harm that you've caused the victim and society as a whole.
But what about those offenses that people would often think are particularly heinous? They're serious. Boy, a scumbag behavior them person they do. And people are not satisfied that you've gotten 20 years. They perhaps think you should have gotten more. Do you think there's room in our discussion here for, I suppose, reforming of sentencing guidelines or expanding how many years you perhaps attribute to particular offenses? I know you mentioned aggravating and mitigating factors, and just for simpler context, what are some of the things that would either help your sentencing to go down or would actually allow your sentencing to be increased? That's what we kind of mean. But Xavier and Deshaun, we live in Jamaica. Crime is rampant. People commit serious crimes every day. Don't you think that perhaps some offenses need a little bit more than others? What do you think? I'm not putting you guys on the spot, but any thoughts? Do you think what we have on the book is sufficient?
Yeah, I think we also have to think about the fact that one of the main purposes of sentencing is to serve as a deterrent. So you have the punitive aspect, but you also have the deterrent aspect. So you need to ensure that, in a sense, you're sending a message to persons to ensure that if you commit this act, you have these repercussions, and you have this waiting for you beyond the commission of the act. But I do think that there's room for growth. There's room for improvement with regards to ensuring that our sentencing laws actually match some of the crimes that we're facing, and also the frequency of the crimes that we're facing. So as you said, our society is rapidly evolving and we're changing. We're seeing a lot more frequent, a lot more violent crimes, and you have to give kudos to like the JCF for their crime reduction initiatives. But we have to do some work with regards to the laws on the books to ensuring that we're effectively deterring persons and ensuring that persons are actually being sentenced commensurate to the oftentimes egregious acts that they're committing.
And to add, even though we may think about increasing the sentencing, we should also think about what happens inside. What should we do when that is actually increased? So we probably get the deterrent components through the increasing, but what of those people who weren't deterred and they actually get subjected to the sentence? How can we actually look on the rehabilitative part of it so that when those people actually serve the time and get reintegrated into society, they won't recommit that particular offense or any other offense for that matter, you know?
So it seems to just really essentially be a sort of balancing out. We appreciate that sentencing isn't a precise mathematical formulation, you know, but at the same time, as much as you want to deter people from doing actions, sentencing has a rehabilitative component. And I think JFJ's mandate is that, yes, we want commensurate sentencing to the actions that you have done, but at the same time, if young people have been incarcerated, we want to know that when they have been incarcerated, that they come out, when they do come out, a better person. They've perhaps learned some life skills and an understanding of what they've done to be wrong, so that rehabilitative component are not to be lost on us. Alright, so
also that your rights aren't just completely suspended when you're incarcerated. So not just because you're in the prison system means that you should just be subject to any treatment. And so again, you have the right to be free from inhumane and torturous treatment. And so I think it's also extremely important for us, not just as young people, but as a society, to be savvy, to be privy, to be aware of the very rights that we have. Because a knowledgeable population is an empowered population.
I like that.
That is.
But then, Deshaun, that brings me to this question of how do we ensure that young people are knowledgeable and savvy about their rights? If a police officer comes and wants to fling in a van back, you know what you should say, you know how to acquit yourself. If you reach the point of detaining you, you are saying in your head, well, all hope isn't lost because I know that Constitution says ABC.
XYZ, and you can really tough like Xavier.
So how do we get people to be more aware and knowledgeable?
I mean, that's why we're here. That's why we're having the Just Tea podcast. And so it's important that young people are leading conversations like these because you're more likely to listen to somebody your age. You hear something from your peers and internalize it. But I think also we need to go back to the days when we had things like civics in schools. I mean, I know that
I'm my grandfather.
I'm going to sound like an old man, but I really think we need to go back to having civics and programs within schools where we teach young persons about the rights and the responsibilities that they have that come with having those rights.
Yes.
I think it's important that we start from a very early age. Of course, we're not going to go to a primary school or a basic school and teach children that, okay, section 14KI of your constitution says it's going to be tailored for your age. And so comprehensive civic education, that's what we really want. And also, young people are very tech savvy. You can go on the internet, you can go on Google, you can access a lot of these bodies, the constitutions and the different instruments that give you rights are on Google, they're on the internet, and they're in accessible forms now. So I believe you even have like a Patwa version for those who probably don't understand the high English of the Constitution. There are a lot of accessible ways that it's broken down and made available to the general public.
Well, this is where I'm going to respectfully disagree. Because I don't think it has been extensively broken down. In fact, I don't think if you are not a young person of a particular ilk or caliber, let me say that, you are not randomly going on Google to tell me what does the Constitution say. We here have legal backgrounds.
Yes.
I'm an attorney, you're a law student. It is part and parcel of the course for us to want to get into, interact with that. But I find it hard to believe that a random young person isn't going to do that. I mean, and this is no shade to young people. I'm just saying the reality is my little brother is not going on social media. He's interested in Roblox, Minecraft, and those sorts of things. So I think we have to be real with the circumstance and understand that if we're not perhaps putting it in young people's faces in ways in which they can appreciate, they're not going to take the initiative to go and read the law. And I would also wager that it is not in fact accessible. I, on an everyday basis, I'm often reading the legislation. I am trained from the law school to understand how you interpret this and that. Deshaun, there is a lot of old English in our laws.
I can tell you.
And this is the 21st century. These people are talking as if we're living in the 14th century in Europe.
Yes.
I mean, it's not as simple. And I mean, when you talk then in terms of accessibility, I mean, there are some portals that you might go on the Ministry of Justice website for it, but that might not reflect the latest amendments. So now, if you are not perhaps savvy enough, you're thinking, well, I have to go perhaps call the Houses of Parliament library, I have to go check the different requisite offices. I'm just saying, if you're not in that space, or if you're not so minded to do that, you're not taking those extra steps. And I do know, I have to give credit where credit is due. I am aware of JLIP, which I think is is a portal, and it's an initiative from the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs to host different pieces of legislation as updated as it can be in an accessible way. And I do commend that. But I would need to see a lot more of that being done, and more often and more frequently. I mean, people, if you're not interacting with the law on an everyday basis, I don't think young people are going to do that. And so I'd also wager here to say that we see social media influencers, we see content creators who we can identify with. Some of these agencies could be perhaps collaborate.
Yes.
You know, what if a bad sec you can do one video? I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You wanna, of course, you have to match the brand with the content creator. And we know those sorts of background information, but I think my charge at the end of the day is that enough isn't being done.
Yeah.
And if you're not nerdy and like me, you're not going to go and look for it. So I think we have to be real. This is also a shameless plug that I simplify the constitution and legal stuff. But we need to do that a little more consistently.
Instagram.
Is I legally nerdy on TikTok, and of course my Instagram is as someone.campbell. And I think I'm just maybe one of the few young people, because I believe in this, and I think if people are more knowledgeable about their rights, and of course they're more informed and they are more empowered. But I do think that from taking me outside of it from an institutional level, the actors and the powers that maybe need to do a lot more in simplifying and making it more accessible.
Agree.
And taking into account persons who have special needs.
Yeah, persons who perhaps aren't even literate, and
Right.
persons who can't read. And I will concur on the fact that yes, there are, let's say, versions of these laws perhaps made accessible, because I do know that there's a version of the Constitution and there's a version of, let's say, the National Youth Policy that's made accessible by having it in power and having it with graphics and all those things. So there are new materials created. I think the gap here is that we're not meeting young people where they are.
Right.
And we're not making the content exciting and like making, as you said, young people actually wanting to read these things.
Right.
That is where we come in. That is why you should have young persons in these spaces. And that is why you should have young persons being involved in the conversations when it comes on to what we need to ensure that we're being updated and we're being kept
abreast of what's going on.
abreast with what's going on, the law, and all that we need to know to protect our rights.
And I would only add that it be conversations with young people who are not like us.
Yes.
You don't need another nerdy tamoy who sits and reads Constitution every minute. Like, you don't need a Xavier who can reel out section this. You don't need a Deshaun who can give you a policy brief. We need, I don't want to, me not shade young people, but regular people who aren't like that, because they are our target audience.
Yes.
Me not need them more simplified.
We don't need them more simplified.
You need to simplify.
So we want it to be a representative representation.
Yeah, and that's how you really reach impact, because if you keep preaching to the same people who are already converted, the impact is lost.
Yes.
So, we're wrapping up, and just final thoughts. This is a big conversation. Consequences, criminal responsibility. If you want to sprinkle a little concept about expungement, I leave the floor to you, gents, to just give us your 2 cents.
Well, this was a lovely conversation, and I'm telling you, this is much tea. If we didn't have gas, it goes. And I'm sure you viewers out there learned something, that hey, you have rights. But even though you have rights, that does not mean that it locks you away from your liberty being taken if you would have committed an offense. But even though you commit an offense, your rights aren't depleted, none at all. They're still there, and the only weapon against it is you if you don't know it. So try your best to know your rights and exercise them properly, and also know the laws of the land, so that you can you don't want to come in contravention to it. Nobody commit no crime, you understand? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So know your rights, know the laws, so that you can be a model citizen. Yeah, and this is the tea.
Yes. And I think if I'd add anything, I'm really glad that you mentioned the whole concept of expungement. It's quite sort of mystic or mystified, but it's important that we as young people sort of demystify, because expungement really is an avenue that's available particularly to juveniles. And so what we're really talking about when we talk about expungement is, let's say, a clean slate. So once you've gone through the process, once you've gone through the rehabilitative and the restorative process, if there are signs that you have accepted that what you've done is wrong and you're willing to be reintegrated into society, you can apply for your records, your criminal conviction, to be expunged. And that's in very simple terms what it's about. But again, I concur with Xavier in the idea that with every action there's a consequence, and with every right there's a responsibility. And as young persons, it's your responsibility to be up to date and to know the rights that you have available to you, because really it's the only way that you can protect yourself. Don't wait upon somebody else. Don't wait upon the ministry. Don't wait upon it. Know your rights. Get involved. Get knowledgeable. And I'm going to add as well that to our stakeholders, to our government agencies, to our ministries, and also to our civil society organizations like JFJ, this is your responsibility to help bridge that knowledge gap, to help ensure that there are different accessible ways through which young persons, though we know it's their responsibility, there are different ways that they can access the information that they need to know to protect themselves.
Yes. Well, that was a belly full. I have nothing further to add. Listen, everybody, make sure you watch the video. Show your mother and father the right the cat. Everybody, I need you to put some comments, give us some love, give us some emojis, but also engage with us.
Yes.
Tell us your thoughts on this conversation and perhaps something else that you'd want to see discussed. Guys, my name's Tamoy, this is Xavier, this is Dashawn, and this is the Just Tea broadcast. Until next time, toodles!